April 1943, 27,000 feet above the coast of France, a veteran German pilot of Jagdgeschwader 26 watches a formation of new American fighters climb laboriously toward his Focke-Wulf 190. The Americans are massive, barrel-bodied, wings too small for the heavy fuselages they carry. To a man who has flown against Spitfires for 3 years, they look ridiculous. He keys his radio, he laughs. They have sent us flying milk bottles. His wingman laughs with him. Across the Luftwaffe that spring, the same joke is told in fighter wings from the Channel to the Mediterranean. The American aircraft is given a name: Milchflash, the fat barrel, the flying tub, meat for the slaughter. 11 weeks later, on June 26, 1943, at 27,000 feet above Villa Coublé, a 23-year-old farm boy from Lawton, Oklahoma, will sit trapped inside one of those milk bottles. The canopy welded shut by cannon fire, oil across his goggles, blood in his mouth, 3 of the 4 main longerons in his fuselage severed. 200 bullet holes punch through the metal around him. A German Focke-Wulf will pull alongside him. The German pilot, blonde young, will fire everything he has into the wreck. 20mm cannon shells, heavy machine gun bullets. The wreck will not die. Then the German will raise his hand in salute. And the American will fly home. His name was Robert S. Johnson. He would survive the war and live for another 55 years after that day over France, trying to learn the name of the man who chose mercy. He would never find it. This is the story of how the Luftwaffe stopped laughing. It is the story of an aircraft they called a milk bottle and the 8 Browning machine guns that turned their laughter into something else entirely. It is the story of 15,683 American fighters built in factories that ran night and day. It is the story of farm boys from Oklahoma and German aces from the Eastern Front, of an avalanche that came down on Europe between 1943 and 1945, and of one salute exchanged between 2 men who never knew each other's names. To understand how it began, we have to go back to a drawing board in Farmingdale, New York, in June of 1940. To the man with a pencil who was about to build a dinosaur, June 1940, France has fallen in 6 weeks. In the corner office of Republic Aviation, a 43-year-old engineer named Alexander Kartveli reads the cable from Washington. The Army Air Corps wants a new fighter. They want it to fly higher than anything in the sky. They want it to climb above the Luftwaffe and stay there. Kartveli does not sleep that night. He had been born in Tbilisi when Tbilisi was still part of the Russian Empire. He had watched one empire collapse. He understood what aircraft could do to nations. His earlier design, the P-43 Lancer, had been a disappointment. Too light, too slow, too vulnerable. He sketches a new aircraft now. Not light, not nimble, something else entirely. He draws an engine first. A Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower, the most powerful production aircraft engine on Earth. Around the engine he draws a turbo supercharger, a monstrous machine of pipes and impellers hidden in the rear fuselage, fed by exhaust gases through ducts that run the length of the aircraft. The supercharger will let the engine breathe at 30,000 feet, where the Messerschmitt 109 grows tired and the Spitfire begins to gasp. Around the supercharger he draws a fuselage so large his draftsmen stop laughing and start staring. When the design is presented to the army, one officer studies the blueprints for a long time and says nothing. Kartveli speaks first. It will be a dinosaur, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions. 12 months later, on May 6, 1941, the XP-47B lifts off the runway at Farmingdale. It weighs nearly 7 tons empty. Test pilots circle it on the ground before climbing in, the way men circle a horse that may not let them mount. But once airborne, the dinosaur reveals itself. At 27,000 feet, the engine is still pulling full power. The turbo supercharger howls behind the cockpit. The aircraft dives at speeds no fighter has ever achieved. The Army orders 171 immediately, then 602, then thousands. In the heartland of America, the men who will fly it are still in high school. Bridgeport, Connecticut, September 1942. Major Hubert Zemke is 28 years old. He has the flat effect of a man who does not waste words. His pilots call him Hub. His enemies, when he has any, will call him many things, but never careless. He has been given the 56th Fighter Group. He has also been given the first operational P-47s. He hates them. The aircraft ground loops on landing, swinging violently to one side as the massive torque overwhelms inexperienced rudder work. It rolls on takeoff when pilots apply throttle too quickly. In a dive, it builds speed faster than any fighter before it. And at high speeds, the controls freeze. Pilots discover a phenomenon physicists have only just begun to name: compressibility. The shockwave forms across the wings. The elevators lock. The aircraft will not pull out. Between September 1942 and January 1943, the 56th Fighter Group loses 18 pilots and 41 aircraft. Not to combat, to training. 18 young Americans dead in Connecticut before a single P-47 has fired at a German. This is the first hidden truth of the Thunderbolt. The aircraft that will one day terrify the Luftwaffe is at this moment terrifying its own pilots. Among them is a quiet farm boy from Lawton, Oklahoma, Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, 23 years old. He had grown up shooting jackrabbits with a .22 rifle. He had never seen the ocean. He had never flown above 10,000 feet until the Army put him in a cockpit. He climbs into his P-47 for the first time and feels the throttle resist his hand. He pushes it forward. The aircraft does not accelerate, it launches. Later he would write that it was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. Beside him, others learn the same lesson. Francis Gabreski, 24 years old, the son of Polish immigrants from Pennsylvania. Walker Mahurin, 24, sharp-eyed and impatient. David Schilling, 24, the squadron's natural leader. And another man is preparing in another group, under another commander, Major Don Blakesley, 25 years old, a former Eagle Squadron volunteer who had already flown Spitfires for the RAF. He had flown combat against the Luftwaffe for the RAF before America entered the war. He had seen the German fighter pilots up close. He looked at the P-47 when it arrived in England and did not laugh. "It dives like a brick," he told his pilots. "Make the brick work for you." April 8, 1943, the Channel Coast. The 4th Fighter Group launches the first P-47 sortie in European history, a rodeo mission, fly low across the Channel. Lure the Luftwaffe into combat. It is a disaster. The radios fail at altitude, the oxygen systems leak, pilots report tunnel vision, slurred speech, slow reflexes. They cannot speak to each other. They cannot coordinate. They turn for home before contact is made. Across the airfield at Debden, the maintenance crews work through the night. The radios are American sets adapted from bomber installations. They are not designed for fighter altitudes. The engineers replace them. They replace them again. In France, Major Joseph Priller reads the intelligence summary from Jagdgeschwader 26, 27 years old, commanding officer. Known by everyone in the Luftwaffe as Pips, he laughs. The Americans, he tells his pilots, have built a fighter that cannot find them. The Germans give the new aircraft a name. They call it the milk flash, the milk bottle, the fat barrel, the flying tub. They prepare to slaughter it. April 15, 1943. 1 week later, Major Don Blakesley leads 3 Thunderbolts of the 335th Fighter Squadron above the Belgian coast. The radios are working, the oxygen flows, the aircraft hold formation. Below them, Focke-Wulf 190s of Jagdgeschwader 26 climb out from a coastal airfield, unaware they are being watched. Blakesley remembers what he had told his men. The brick, make the brick work. He rolls inverted. He dives. The Thunderbolt accelerates past 500 miles per hour. The German pilots, climbing, never see him until the tracers reach them. Blakesley fires one burst. 8 50 caliber Brownings. The Focke-Wulf shudders, breaks apart and falls in pieces toward Ostend. It is the first P-47 kill of the war. Blakesley zooms back to altitude. The remaining Germans do not pursue. They cannot reach him. He turns for England. When he lands, he is asked what the aircraft was like in combat. He thinks for a moment. It still flies like a brick, he says, but a brick that dives faster than anything they have. In the weeks that follow, the killing goes both ways. The first month of P-47 operations is brutal for the Americans. 14 Thunderbolts are lost. Only 3 German fighters are confirmed destroyed. The exchange ratio is catastrophic. In Berlin, Luftwaffe intelligence circulates the numbers. They confirm what Priller had said. The American fighter is meat for the slaughter. But something is happening that the Germans cannot see. The Thunderbolts that come home are not coming home clean. One aircraft returns from a mission over France in early May with 21 cannon holes punched through the wings and fuselage. The pilot is unharmed. He had flown 2 hours back across the channel with most of his rudder shot away. Another returns with over 100 machine gun strikes. The radial engine has lost a cylinder. The aircraft still cruises at 250 miles per hour. A third absorbs a 20mm shell directly behind the cockpit. The armor plate holds. The pilot walks away. In any other fighter of the war, these aircraft would have disintegrated. The Spitfire's liquid-cooled Merlin engine would have boiled dry within minutes. The Messerschmitt's slim fuselage would have folded. The yak would have burned. The P-47 simply keeps flying. The radial engine has no coolant lines to sever, no glycol to drain. The fuselage is built around longerons heavy enough to support a medium bomber. The armor plate behind the pilot weighs more than a man. The Luftwaffe sees the kill ratio and celebrates. They do not see the casualty rate. Of the 14 Americans lost, several are recovered alive, bailed out over the channel, picked up by air-sea rescue. Of the Germans shot down, none. The arithmetic of attrition has begun. It has begun in favor of the side everyone believes is losing. By the end of May 1943, Hub Zemke has stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night. He sits in his office at Horsham St. Faith in eastern England, surrounded by maps and gun camera film. He has watched the same footage 100 times. The Focke-Wulfs diving, the Messerschmitts climbing, his own pilots, again and again, trying to dogfight aircraft that turn tighter and climb faster. Trying to fight them, and losing, he realizes something the Germans have not yet understood. He cannot turn with them. He cannot climb with them. He must stop trying. He must use the brick. He picks up a pencil. He begins to draw a tactic that will not exist in any manual. He will call it boom and zoom. The men who fly it will call themselves the Wolf Pack. And in 3 weeks, a 23-year-old farm boy from Oklahoma named Robert Johnson will fly a mission over Villa Kublai. He will not return clean. He will not return easily. But he will return, and the laughter will begin to die. July 1943. Horsham St. Faith Airfield, eastern England. Hub Zemke gathers his squadron leaders around a map of northern France. He has not slept in 3 nights. He does not look like a man who is winning. He points to the map. We stopped trying to fight like them, he says. Starting today. The pilots wait, Zemke explains. The P-47 cannot turn with a Focke-Wulf. It cannot climb with a Messerschmitt. Pretending otherwise has killed Americans, so they will stop pretending. They will fly higher than the Germans. Always higher, 30,000 feet, 32,000, as high as the turbo supercharger will take them. There they will hold, there they will wait. When the Germans appear below, the Thunderbolts will roll inverted and dive. They will fall on the enemy from above. Not in pairs, not in fours, in packs. He calls the formation the Wolf Pack. He calls the tactic boom and zoom. It is not original. The Germans had used it on the Eastern Front. The Americans had read the reports. But until now, no fighter on the Allied side had the dive speed to make it work. The Thunderbolt does. In a vertical dive from 30,000 feet, a P-47 can exceed 550 miles per hour. No German fighter can follow. The Focke-Wulf 190 risks structural failure above 500 miles per hour. The Messerschmitt 109 loses its controls in a high-speed dive. They cannot chase, so the Thunderbolt strikes, and the Thunderbolt leaves. Zemke writes the tactic into the 56 Fighter Group Standing Orders in July of 1943. He does not know it yet, but he has just begun the unmaking of the Luftwaffe. But the tactic that would save the Wolf Pack was born from the cost of a lesson the 56th Fighter Group had paid 3 weeks earlier. A lesson written in blood, in oil, in 200 bullet holes by a young farm boy from Oklahoma who should not have come home. 3 weeks earlier, Villa Kublai, June 26, 1943. The mission is escort. 48 P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group fly cover for B-17s pulling away from the French coast at 27,000 feet. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson is in the rear of the formation. He is flying tail-end Charlie, the most exposed position. The position given to the newest pilots. Johnson is 23 years old. He has been in combat for 6 weeks. He is looking at the cloud deck below when the world ends. 16 Focke-Wulf 190s of Misjudged 26 dive out of the sun. They have been climbing for 30 minutes, waiting for this moment. They strike the rear of the American formation at 500 miles per hour. Johnson never sees them. The first 20mm shell explodes inside his canopy. Glass turns to vapor. Hydraulic fluid sprays across his face. The instrument panel disintegrates. A second shell punches through the engine cowling and walks the length of the aircraft. Johnson is wounded. In the nose, in the leg, in the right arm. He cannot see through the oil on his goggles. He cannot hear over the wind tearing through the shattered cockpit. He reaches for the canopy release. It does not move. A 20mm shell has exploded in the canopy track. The rails have been welded shut by the heat. The canopy is jammed. He cannot bail out. He is trapped in a burning aircraft at 27,000 feet, alone 200 miles from England. He prays. The aircraft is still flying. The Pratt & Whitney radial engine, 2,000 horsepower of air-cooled American iron, is still running. It is missing cylinders. It is leaking oil. It is on fire behind the firewall, but it is still running. Johnson wipes his face with a sleeve and finds blood. He levels the aircraft. He points the nose toward England. He flies. He does not climb. He cannot climb. He cannot dive. He cannot maneuver. He can only fly straight, slow, and visible. The clouds open below him. The channel is 2 hours away. He thinks about his mother in Oklahoma. Then the Focke-Wulf appears. A single German fighter, alone, climbing toward him from below. Johnson cannot turn, cannot fire, cannot run. The German positions himself behind the crippled Thunderbolt and opens fire. 20mm cannon shells walk across the wings. Heavy machine gun bullets stitch the fuselage. Johnson huddles behind his armor plate. He cannot see the attacker. He can only feel the impacts. Hammer blows on steel. The German fires until his cannon ammunition is gone. Then he closes again with machine guns only and fires those until they are also empty. Then he pulls alongside. Johnson, peering through a film of oil and blood, sees the German for the first time. The man is young. Blonde, he is staring at the wreck of the P-47 with an expression Johnson cannot place, confusion, then something closer to disbelief. The German is close enough that Johnson can see the markings on his fuselage, the insignia of Misjudged 26. The two pilots fly side by side. Neither of them is in a position to kill the other. Neither of them speaks the other's language. Neither of them will ever know the other's name. The German raises a hand. He gives an informal salute, a nod of one airman to another, an acknowledgement. Then he peels away, dropping back toward France, and is gone. Johnson is alone again. He flies on. The engine begins to fail 20 miles from the English coast. He nurses it across the channel. He sees the cliffs of Kent. He sees the airfield at Manston. He puts the Thunderbolt down on its belly, sliding to a halt on the grass. The ground crew runs to him. The first man to reach the aircraft stops, looks at it, and crosses himself. The crew chief begins counting bullet holes and stops at 200. He does not count higher. He cannot. 21 20mm cannon shells have struck the aircraft. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone, are severed. The control cables are partially cut. The engine has taken direct hits in multiple cylinders. 1 cannon shell exploded 6 inches from Johnson's head. Another detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. Either should have killed him. Neither did. The aircraft is towed to a hangar. American engineers from Wright Field will fly across the Atlantic to study it. They will photograph every hole. They will map every impact. They will write reports that will be classified for the rest of the war. The reports will say what no American expected, what no German imagined. The P-47 cannot easily be killed. Robert Johnson is hospitalized for 3 weeks. He will return to combat. He will become an ace. He will end the war with 27 aerial victories, the second highest of any P-47 pilot in Europe. But the man who almost killed him on June 26, 1943, the unnamed German pilot from JG-26, will pass into history without identification. Researchers have spent 80 years trying to find him. The combat reports for that day are incomplete. The pilot may have been killed later in the war. He may have lived to old age in Germany, never knowing the man whose life he had spared. We will never know his name. We only know what he did. He fired everything he had into the most stubborn airplane ever built, and when the airplane refused to die, he saluted. He turned, he flew home. The encounter changed nothing about the war. It changed everything about how each side understood what was happening. In Berlin, the Air Ministry receives reports from the JG-26 operations log. They request more information. They cross-reference the kill claims. They begin to understand that something is wrong. The American fighter they have been mocking does not behave like a fighter. It behaves like a flying fortress. It absorbs damage that should be lethal and continues operating. It returns its pilot. It returns to combat. General Major Adolf Galland, Inspector of Fighters, orders a technical investigation. He wants the Luftwaffe's engineers to examine captured P-47 wreckage. He wants to know how an aircraft with no liquid cooling system, with such enormous frontal area, with such apparent vulnerability, keeps surviving. The investigation will take months. By the time the report reaches Galland's desk, it is already too late. The wolf pack is hunting. August 17, 1943. The largest American bombing raid in history launches against the German aircraft factories at Schweinfurt and Regensburg. 376 B-17s lift off from English airfields before dawn. Their mission is to destroy the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg. If they succeed, German fighter production will collapse. If they fail, they will die in their hundreds. The P-47s can escort them only partway. The Thunderbolt's range, even with belly tanks, ends near the German border. After that, the bombers fly alone. The Luftwaffe has prepared for this day. Hundreds of German fighters are scrambled along the bomber routes. The defenders include the Bf-110's Astoria formations, heavy twin-engine destroyers armed with 20mm cannons and 21cm rockets, designed specifically to break up bomber formations. They cannot fight other fighters. They are too slow, too unmaneuverable, but they do not have to fight other fighters. The other fighters are not supposed to be there. This is where Walker Mahurin enters the story. Captain Mahurin is 24 years old. He is from Fort Wayne, Indiana. He had been a college student before the war. He is sharp-eyed, impatient, and disliked by some of his fellow pilots for being too aggressive. He is also, on this morning, leading a flight from the 63rd Fighter Squadron. He spots the Bf-110s before they spot him. They are below him, climbing into position to attack the bomber stream. They are concentrating on the B-17s. They are not watching above. Mahurin rolls inverted and dives. The boom and zoom that Zemke had written into the standing orders 6 weeks earlier executes itself perfectly. Thunderbolts fall on the German destroyers from 28,000 feet. The Bf-110s, heavier and slower, never get a chance to break formation. Mahurin fires. A Bf-110 disintegrates. He pulls up. He fires again. A second Bf-110 explodes. He climbs, rolls, dives once more. A third. 3 confirmed kills in less than 5 minutes. The 56th Fighter Group claims 17 German aircraft destroyed that day. The largest single-day total any American fighter group has yet achieved. Somewhere in the chaos above central Germany, Mahurin's gunfire also finds a Focke-Wulf 190 of Jagdgeschwader 26. The pilot is killed instantly. The aircraft falls in flames into the German countryside. The pilot's name is Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland. He is 28 years old. He is the younger brother of Adolf Galland, Inspector of Fighters, the most famous fighter pilot in Germany. The Luftwaffe calls him Wutz. He had survived France. He had survived the Battle of Britain. He had survived 3 years of war on the Western Front. He had personally been credited with 55 aerial victories. He does not survive Walker Mahurin. When the news reaches the Galland family in Westerholt, Adolf Galland is in Berlin. He is told by telephone. He listens without speaking. He hangs up. He returns to work. He never speaks of his brother's death in public during the war. He will write about it after, in his memoirs. He will not blame the Americans. He will blame himself. He had ordered the interdiction. He had sent his brother to die. The death of Wutz Galland is not the turning point of the air war. But for the men who fought it, on both sides, it is the moment when the question stops being whether the P-47 can win. It becomes whether the Luftwaffe can survive. 6 weeks later, on October 8, 1943, the question is answered. The target is Bremen. More than 250 American heavy bombers. They are escorted partway by P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group, now operating from Halesworth Airfield, deeper into bomber territory than the Thunderbolts have ever flown. The Luftwaffe meets them with everything it has. Among the German pilots scrambled that morning is Major Hans Philipp. He is 26 years old. He is the Commodore of Jagdgeschwader 1. He has flown over 500 combat missions. He has been credited with 206 aerial victories, almost all on the Eastern Front, where he had killed Soviet pilots in numbers that defy comprehension. He is one of the most successful fighter aces in the history of aerial warfare. He has fought above Stalingrad, above Leningrad, above the steppes of Russia for 2.5 winters. He has never fought P-47s. He climbs his Focke-Wulf 190 to 28,000 feet, looking for the bomber stream. He finds the bombers. He also finds, above the bombers, formations of Thunderbolts in the high cover position. The Thunderbolts see him first. What follows is recorded in the combat reports of the 56th Fighter Group, but the specific kill credit has been debated by historians for decades. Multiple Thunderbolts engaged Philipp's aircraft. Multiple pilots claimed strikes. The Luftwaffe records confirm only that Major Philipp was killed in the engagement. What is not disputed is what the encounter meant. Hans Philipp had survived 4 years of total war. He had killed more enemy pilots than any American would kill in the entire conflict. He was the embodiment of Luftwaffe excellence, the kind of pilot whose skill should have made any aircraft survivable. He died in 90 seconds. When the report reaches Berlin, it is not made public. The German press does not announce the death of Hans Philipp. To do so would be to admit that the Eastern Front aces, the men whose victories had been propaganda staples for years, were now being killed routinely by the same American fighter that had been called a flying milk bottle 6 months before. The truth is held inside the Luftwaffe. The truth begins to spread. By November 1943, German pilots are writing home in cautious language. They speak of the Amerikaner, they speak of the Jabos, they no longer laugh. Heinz Knoke is 22 years old. He is a lieutenant in Jagdgeschwader 11. He is one of the most experienced young pilots in the Luftwaffe, with over 200 missions and the Iron Cross First Class. He keeps a combat diary throughout the war, a habit forbidden by regulations but tolerated because of his record. In late 1943, his diary entries begin to change. The early entries had been confident. The Americans were targets, the bombers were prey, easy kills. The later entries are different. He writes about losses, about friends who do not come back, about the feeling of being attacked from above by aircraft that move faster than his own can dive. He writes about the sound of the 50 caliber rounds when they strike his fuselage. He writes about pulling out of dives so steep that he loses consciousness, only to find himself still alive because the American pilot did not pursue. In February 1944, after an encounter near Hanover, he writes a single sentence that will be quoted by historians for the next 80 years. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year, he is correct. In January 1944, the first P-47 D-22s arrive in England. They are fitted with a new propeller. Hamilton Standard, hydromatic, paddle-bladed, 13 feet in diameter, with broad cord blades that bite into the air like oars. The improvement is dramatic. Earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at 2,200 feet per minute. The paddle blade variants climb at 3,000. They match the Bf-109, they match the FW-190. The P-47 has stopped being a fighter that wins only when it dives. It has become a fighter that wins from any position. Zemke's Wolfpack flies the new variant in combat for the first time in mid-January 1944. They climb to 30,000 feet over the Dutch coast and wait for the Germans to come up. The Germans come up. The dogfight lasts 11 minutes. When it ends, 4 Focke-Wulfs are falling toward the North Sea and 1 Thunderbolt does not return. The Wolfpack lands at Halesworth. The ground crews count the aircraft. They count again. They check the parking dispersal. They check the field. 1 man is missing. This is what victory costs. This is what victory will continue to cost. But the factories at Farmingdale do not stop building. The training fields in Texas and Arizona do not stop graduating pilots. The Wolfpack does not stop flying. The Luftwaffe stops nothing as quickly. By March 1944, the kill ratio has reversed. The P-47s of the 8th Air Force are claiming 4 Germans for every American lost. The 56th Fighter Group alone has destroyed more than 200 enemy aircraft in the air. Hub Zemke has been promoted to colonel. His Wolfpack has become the most decorated fighter group in the European theatre, but in the operations room at Halesworth, Zemke is not celebrating. He is reading a memo from 8th Air Force headquarters. The P-51 Mustang is coming. The long-range escort role will transfer to the new aircraft. The P-47 will be reassigned. His Wolfpack, his Thunderbolts, the aircraft he has shaped into a weapon and a tactic and a culture, will be moved off the deep penetration missions they have just learned to dominate. They will be sent down, they will be sent low, they will be sent to the ground, and what the P-47 will do on the ground in the months between March 1944 and May 1945 will be more terrifying than anything its enemies have yet imagined. The Luftwaffe had thought the worst was the 50 caliber Brownings. It was not. The worst was still coming. Spring 1944. The air war is changing. The Mustangs arrive in numbers, long range, slender. Built for the deep escort missions the P-47 had been forced to begin and could not finish. The new aircraft has the legs the Thunderbolt never had. It can fly to Berlin and back. It can hold the bombers across the entire length of Germany. The P-47s come off the escort flights 1 squadron at a time. The men who fly them do not take it well. Hub Zemke fights the reassignment. He writes letters. He requests audiences with senior officers. He believes his Wolfpack has earned the right to keep doing what it has learned to do. He is told no. The Thunderbolt is going to the 9th Air Force. The 9th is tactical. The 9th flies low. The 9th is the Air Force that will support the invasion when the invasion comes. In the spring of 1944, every American in England knows the invasion is coming. They do not know when. They do not know where. They know only that they will be in the air above it when it begins. The P-47 is fitted with new equipment for its new role. Bomb racks under the wings. High-velocity aircraft rockets under the pylons, each rocket equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. The 8 50 caliber Brownings remain in place. The ammunition load remains. 3,400 rounds. A Thunderbolt going low to attack ground targets is carrying more firepower than a battalion of infantry. The pilots who had practiced deflection shooting at 28,000 feet now learn to read terrain at 50. They learn to recognize a Panzer at 500 yards. They learn the silhouette of a German fuel truck. They learn what a railway switch looks like from a Thunderbolt rolling in at 400 miles per hour. They learn something else. Flak. The Wehrmacht has not been idle. Every road, every bridge, every rail junction in occupied France is now defended by 20mm and 37mm anti-aircraft guns. The guns fire heavy explosive shells in clouds of overlapping fire. They are mounted on trucks, on half-tracks, on stationary positions. They are crewed by men who have learned what American fighter bombers can do and who have learned how to kill them. The kill ratio that had been so favorable in air-to-air combat does not transfer to ground attack. P-47 losses to flak in the spring and summer of 1944 climb steadily. The average pilot of the 9th Air Force flies low, and many of them do not come home. This is the cost the Thunderbolt pays for its new role. The pilots who pay it know. June 6, 1944, Normandy. Before dawn, more than 9,000 Allied aircraft move across the English Channel. Among them are over 500 P-47s, flying cover for the invasion fleet. The Luftwaffe cannot reach the beaches. For 4 years, the German Air Force has been the dominant air arm in Western Europe. On the morning of the largest amphibious invasion in human history, it manages to put almost no fighters over the landing zones. 2 aircraft try, 1 pass, then nothing. The sky belongs to the Americans, the British, the Canadians, the Poles, the French, the Czechs. It belongs, layer upon layer, to formations of fighters stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. The P-47s of the 9th Air Force fly low cover. They orbit the beaches, watching the road network behind Normandy for any German movement that dares to appear in daylight. The movement does not dare. The Wehrmacht learns within hours that anything mechanical moving on a French road in daylight is destroyed. Trucks, tanks, staff cars, horse-drawn supply wagons, locomotives, anything that moves dies. In June 1944 alone, the 9th Air Force claims more than 3,800 trucks and 650 locomotives destroyed. Post-war research will show the actual numbers were lower. The pilots were counting in chaos. They were counting at high speed. They were not always right, but the effect is real. The German army in Normandy cannot move in daylight. It cannot resupply. It cannot reinforce. Every column that tries is hammered to wreckage on the road by aircraft the Wehrmacht calls Jabos. Fighter bombers. Death from above. The Germans use a phrase for the panic that overtakes their men when the thunderbolts appear. Jabo fever, the trembling of soldiers who have already learned that there is no defense and no cover and no escape. Among the men flying these missions, the casualties are heavy. Walker Mahurin, the captain from Indiana who had killed Wutz Galland the year before, is shot down over France in March of 1944. He evades capture. He returns to England through the resistance. He is sent home. Hub Zemke, the architect of the Wolfpack, is shot down on October 30th, 1944. His Thunderbolt encounters severe weather over Germany. The aircraft suffers structural failure in a thunderstorm. He bails out. He is captured. He spends the rest of the war in Stalag Luft I Francis Gabreski, the highest-scoring American ace in Europe with 28 aerial victories, makes a strafing pass on a German airfield on July 20, 1944. His propeller clips the ground. The aircraft bellies in. He is captured the same day. He sits out the rest of the war in prison camp. The Wolfpack is leaderless. The Thunderbolts fly on. By the end of 1944, the Allies have driven the Germans back to their own border. The Battle of the Bulge has been fought and won. The Luftwaffe has been reduced to fragments of its former strength. But the Luftwaffe has one card left, January 1945. In the freezing dawn of New Year's Day, while Allied pilots are still asleep in their quarters at airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands, more than 900 German fighters take off in the largest coordinated Luftwaffe operation since the Battle of Britain. The plan is called Bodenplatte, base plate. The targets are American and British airfields. The plan is to catch Allied aircraft on the ground, refueling and rearming, and destroy them in their hundreds. Adolf Galland had argued against the operation. He had been overruled. It is a gamble. The kind of gamble made by men with nothing left to lose. At airfields across the Low Countries, Thunderbolts and Mustangs are caught on the ground. The sound of strafing fire fills the morning. Hangars burn. Crew chiefs run for cover. American pilots, still pulling on their flying boots, watch their aircraft become pyres. A captured Luftwaffe pilot, brought to a command tent at one of the attacked fields, looks at the burning aircraft on the line and asks his interrogator, in heavily accented English, what the Americans think of that. The American officer answers him. He points to the flight line, where ground crews are already pushing the wrecks aside and preparing dispersal pads for replacement aircraft. He points to the road from the rear, where trucks are arriving with parts and fuel and ammunition. By the end of this week, he says, we will have new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots? The German pilot does not answer. He cannot answer. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft on January 1, 1945. It also lost over 200 pilots killed or captured. Among them were squadron leaders, group commanders, instructors, men whose experience could not be replicated, whose training had taken years, whose deaths represented losses Germany could not absorb. The Allies lost more aircraft, over 300. The Allies lost them and replaced them within the week. This is the moment the Luftwaffe breaks. Not a battle, the Luftwaffe itself. After Bodenplatte, the German Air Force exists largely on paper. Aircraft still take off. Pilots still fly. Some of them still kill. But the organization that had begun the war as the most powerful air arm on Earth is no longer capable of contesting the sky on any front, on any day, against any opponent. The Thunderbolt did not win the war alone. The Mustang fought beside it, the Lightning, the Spitfire, the Tempest, the Soviet Yaks in the east by the tens of thousands. But the Thunderbolt did something none of the others did. It convinced the Luftwaffe in 1943 that the air war, as the Luftwaffe had understood it, was over. By April 1945, fuel shortages have grounded most German aircraft. Experienced pilots are dead or captured. New pilots arrive at frontline units with less than 100 hours of flying time. They are sent up against Americans with 400 hours of training and 2 years of combat experience. The encounters last seconds. On the airfields of the 8th and 9th Air Forces, the Thunderbolts continue to fly. The factories at Farmingdale and Evansville continue to build. By the end of the war, Republic Aviation has produced 15,683 P-47s, more than any other American fighter ever built. In 1953, Adolf Galland publishes his memoirs in West Germany. The book is titled Die Ersten und die Letzten, the first and the last. He writes about his brother Wutz. He writes about the men he had sent to die. He writes about the war he had fought from the cockpit and from the command office. He writes about American industry. He had laughed at it once, in 1939, when American newsreels boasted of factories that could turn out aircraft by the thousands. He had not believed it. He had believed in German engineering, in German training, in the quality of his pilots. He had been right about all of those things. He had been wrong about what they would weigh against. He writes that the Allied air forces buried the Luftwaffe under an avalanche. He uses the German word, Lawine, avalanche. He writes that no number of brave pilots, no amount of brilliant tactics, no act of individual heroism could stop what came down on them from American factories. He does not single out the P-47 by name, but the men who flew against it know. In the years after the war, German fighter pilots gather at reunions in Bavaria, in Berlin, in the small towns where they had grown up. They drink, they tell stories, they remember the friends they had lost. When the Thunderbolt is mentioned, the room goes quiet. A veteran of Jagdgeschwader 26 asked decades later to describe the sound of 8 50 caliber Brownings firing in convergence, struggled to find the words. He said it was not like other gunfire, it was not even like the sound of cannon, it was a single, continuous, mechanical roar. Like a chainsaw running on the air. He said that when he heard it, he knew he had perhaps 1 second to live. He said that some of his friends did not have even that. The P-47 Thunderbolt flew its last combat mission of the Second World War on May 8, 1945. It would serve in Korea. It would serve in the air forces of 15 nations for decades. The last one would not be retired from active service until the 1960s. But its great work was done in 3 years. In April of 1943, German pilots had looked up at the P-47 and laughed. By April of 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The aircraft that had been called a flying milk bottle had outlasted the men who named it. Robert S. Johnson came home from the war and wrote a book. He called it Thunderbolt. He died in Tulsa, Oklahoma on December 27, 1998. He was 78 years old. To the end of his life, he kept a photograph in his study of the aircraft he had flown out of Villers-Coublay on June 26, 1943. He kept it not as a trophy, he kept it as a question. Who was the man in the Focke-Wulf? Who was the German pilot, alone in the sky over France, who fired everything he had into a dying American, and then, when the killing failed, gave a salute and turned for home? Johnson never found out. None of us ever will. But somewhere, in the records that were not kept, in the memories that were not written down, there was a man who chose mercy when he had every reason to choose otherwise. A man who recognized something in another pilot, in another aircraft, in another sky, that he could not name and would not erase. That is the story of the P-47 Thunderbolt. It is the story of guns and engines and turbo superchargers, of factories that ran night and day, of farm boys from Oklahoma who became aces, of German aces who became targets, of the avalanche that came down on Europe in the form of 15,683 American fighters. But underneath all of that, it is also the story of 2 men who never knew each other's names, flying side by side at 27,000 feet on a June morning above occupied France, and the salute that passed between them. The thunder spoke, and in the end the men who survived it remembered, more than anything else, the silence that came afterward.